Hello everyone from Istanbul School. Dear viewers, our guest this week is Prof. Dr. Ömer Türker. Welcome, teacher.
We found it nice, thank you. Thank you. How are you too?
More precisely, we are here, we are your guests, we are at Marmara Faculty of Theology. Thank you for your time.
Estagfirullah, thank you. You took the trouble.
Professor, we would like to talk to you a little about Islamic philosophy, but let's make a basic introduction. Where and when did Islamic philosophy begin? There is a more general question of whether an Islamic philosophy is possible. Of course, I don't know how accurate it is to ask this to someone who studies Islamic philosophy, to someone who is a professor. Could you tell us a little about Islamic philosophy, Professor?
Islamic philosophy is a term that emerged in the modern period. Retrospectively, this term refers to the philosophical tradition that is included in the tradition of sciences in Islamic civilization and represents the thinking mind in the world, the main mind of the tradition of sciences, especially between the 9th century and the 18th century. The word Islam here actually refers to a period. Now, in world history, there are periods when certain civilizations are dominant, when civilizations have the power to produce sciences and explain what exists based on sciences. Here, the Greeks were dominant in a certain period. Then came the Hellenistic period, then the Islamic period. From the 7th century onwards, Muslims gained dominance in the known world and form a tradition of sciences. This includes religious sciences. There is a tradition of religious sciences which we sometimes call religious sciences. In contrast to the tradition of religious sciences, there are rational sciences, philosophical sciences, or the collection of sciences that we call true sciences, which were formed with translations made from the Greek corpus between 200 and 220 AH. This is the name we give to the philosophical accumulation produced within the Islamic civilization in the approximately 1,000-year period from the 7th century to the 17th and 18th centuries. In other words, just as when we say Greek philosophy, the philosophical accumulation produced during the Greek period, let's say we say Indian philosophy, the philosophical accumulation produced during the Indian period, when we think historically, the philosophy produced during the Islamic period is called Islamic philosophy. Various name attempts were actually made here. In other words, there were those who said, let's call it Arab philosophy. They had other name suggestions. But since the Islamic religion is the founding element of this civilization, and since those who belong to different religions in the civilized basin created by this religion can also participate in this production, this is a term used in the Islamic period to mean the philosophical accumulation produced in this civilization. As I said, it was invented in the modern period. This term does not exist in the classical period. In the classical period, there is only the term Felasifetul Islam, philosophers of Islam. That means this: it is used in the sense of philosophers who grew up in the Islamic period. For example, Felasifetul Greek, Greek philosophers means this, that means that. Philosophical activities carried out in the Greek period, philosophers belonging to the Greek period who participated in this production. Greek philosophers means that. Because the philosophical tradition developed in Islamic civilization calls the activity of researching about beings without referring to any religion, authority, or general acceptances regarding existing things as philosophy. That means philosophy. This means that a Muslim can do it, a Christian can do it, a Jew can do it. If it is within the Islamic civilization, we call it Islamic philosophy. If it is within the Greek, we call it Greek philosophy. This is not an activity that belongs to a nation, a very special group with special characteristics. The tradition of sciences passes from civilization to civilization. Every civilization, when it makes a contribution and loses its effectiveness, or another civilization comes to the fore, the accumulation that is formed with that contribution is passed on to the next civilization. Now, the West has taken this flag, we call it Western philosophy. So let's say that after a few hundred years, if another civilization rises, it will take over this flag, create the flag of sciences, the tradition of research, take over the flag, and they will continue this work.
Okay, teacher, maybe this is why it is understood like this. When we say Indian philosophy, Greek philosophy, it is understood as a region, like in the Greek region, in the Indian region. However, there is a historical process that is periodized there. When we say Islamic philosophy, it is generally understood as a direct definition like this, like, is this a philosophy that belongs to the Islamic religion? That is why we are causing discussions like, is Islamic philosophy possible? Is the Islam of knowledge possible?
Yes, in every society, in every great civilized basin, whatever the founding elements of that civilized basin are, they affect the philosophical activity. Islamic civilization is a civilization founded exclusively around the Islamic religion. The founding principle of this civilization is Hijaz, Prophet Muhammad, PBR. It is founded around the Quran and the Sunnah. Therefore, everything that develops in this civilization has to do with the Quran and the Sunnah. In this sense, philosophical activity, philosophical contemplation is connected to the Quran and the Sunnah to one degree or another. In fact, all of its great philosophers are Muslims. In other words, there are non-Muslim philosophers in their works, but great philosophers like Ibn Rushd, Farabi, Ibn Sina are Muslim philosophers, or great thinkers of the critical period like Razi, Kurkani, Taftazani. These are also the great theologians and theologians of their time. Of course, in this sense, it has a relationship with Islam, but being a Muslim is not the condition of being in this philosophical tradition, of producing knowledge about the objects researched based on the basic assumptions of this tradition. There is no condition in this tradition to put the Quran and the Sunnah as a principle and then conduct research around that principle. Therefore, this is not the philosophy of the Islamic religion. This is the philosophical accumulation produced in the civilized world, created by the Islamic religion. I can summarize it this way.
So, who were the most prominent philosophers during this period? What were the issues they defended the most, sir?
Now, the collection of philosophy, that is, the philosophical sciences, spread over a very wide area. It is not like in the modern period. In the modern period, we call philosophy to think about a subject theoretically. That is why someone might call it the philosophy of the head. We call it the philosophy of society, the philosophy of the state, etc. We use such expressions. We call it the philosophy of man. In the classical period, all of the sciences fall under this. Now, in Islamic civilization, there is a dual group of sciences, a group of religious sciences. Now, these are also established based on religious texts. In other words, there are disciplines such as tafsir, fiqh, kalam, tasawwuf. These emerge with the aim of understanding the Quran and the Sunnah. There are a group of disciplines that are tools and instruments for these. For example, like Arabic sciences, we call them Sharia. The reason is this. Sharia here refers to the religion of Islam. These are the disciplines established around Islamic Sharia. Now, a group of sciences are philosophical sciences. What do? They are conducting research on all the objects that we can detect exist, and this research has a certain method. There is a group of sciences that have been systematically continuing since Aristotle, passing through some important historical moments. Now, this includes all physical sciences. In other words, zoology is included, botany is included, meteorology is included, mineralogy is included, the set of information on creation and decay is included. In other words, astronomy is included. Here comes mathematics. After that, arithmetic, geometry, all the disciplines and research on all the sets that we think exist are included in this. Therefore, what are the problems of this philosophical tradition? They are the same today. In other words, let's say that the problems of zoology are the same back then. The problems of botany are the same back then. Well, there are some problems that distinguish this tradition from other traditions. These mostly show themselves in classical psychology, which we call the theory of the soul, in the theory of knowledge, in the theory of method, in metaphysics, in ethics and politics. Let's say that these fields are the emergence of a unique idea of existence for Islam. Muslim philosophers develop an idea of existence. Muslim philosophers' knowledge, as we said earlier, also the beliefs and acceptances of the Islamic religion have an effect here. This effect affects theology of the Islamic period, that is, theological discussions. At the same time, it provides an opportunity to create a structure unique to itself. It becomes a means. Again, this period, they contribute to the method. In other words, logic takes its classical form, the form we teach today when we say classical logic in the Islamic period. In other words, they are interested in knowledge, they are interested in existence, they are interested in humans, and they are interested in other generations.
But they also deal with it based on the Quran and the Sunnah.
The phrase based on the Quran and the Sunnah is not correct, Fatma Hokam. Yes, it's something like this. You are a Muslim, you are doing research. You want the results you reach to be compatible with your beliefs. If you think the results you reach with your beliefs are definite, you interpret them accordingly. This is not research based on the Quran and the Sunnah, if you are paying attention. So let's say you are going to determine how couch grass grows in botany, in what conditions it grows, how it reproduces, how it feeds. What is the point of basing it on the Quran and the Sunnah here?
Doesn't he also consider the Quran and the Sunnah as the basis of knowledge?
No, they don't. Because being a Muslim is not a requirement here. As a Muslim, the philosopher tries to make the conclusions he reaches compatible with the beliefs he derives from the content of the Quran and the Sunnah. But this is not a research based on the Quran. It is not a research based on the Sunnah. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's say you will explain celestial events, meteorological events. How does rain fall? How does hail form? How does dew fall? You will explain this. There is no question of a basic explanation of the Quran and the Sunnah here. That's why I listed the detailed scope of the sciences. Let's say you will do research in botany. How does a pine tree grow? Under what conditions does it grow, feed, grow, and reproduce? Let's say you will do research in zoology. How do chickens lay eggs? How many days does a chick hatch from an egg? At what temperature can this temperature be sustained? A chick will form inside the egg. You will look at these. These are not explanations based on the Quran and the Sunnah. But if the philosopher is Muslim, he wants the results he reaches in meteorology, zoology, botany to be compatible with his basic beliefs. What does being compatible mean? He says that all of these are created by Allah. Look, he thinks like this, just like today. When we look at the issue here based on the Quran and the Sunnah, that is based on the Quran and the Sunnah, there are a few areas that can create problems. In other words, there are conflict areas. These conflict areas are essentially metaphysical areas. For this reason, the fact that philosophers are Muslims allows them to create a new idea of existence, a new theology in metaphysics. In other words, it causes them to address issues from a different perspective than in previous periods. What I mean is this: if you are poor, if you are a member of a religious science group, what do? Let's say there is a field of existence that occurs with human will, that is the field of existence that we create with human will, such as morality, politics, household management. You are doing research on this as a poor person. Let's say you have made a right to shop. What kind of a shopping right is the right to shop that you made? Let's say it was a right to order. Now, is the right of order permissible or not? Is it halal or haram? Under what conditions is it halal? Under what conditions is haram mixed in? As a poor person, you do this based on religious texts. Therefore, fiqh is a religious science. In other words, if you do not take the Quran and the Sunnah into consideration, fiqh is not something that can be done. If you do not take the Quran and the Sunnah into consideration, Islamic theology is not something that can be done. Sufism is not something that can be done. But philosophy is something that can be done whether you take Islamic traditions into consideration or not. Being a Muslim only affects the way you approach these issues, especially regarding their metaphysical dimension. Therefore, there is a version of the same philosophy in the pre-Islamic period. In other words, there are Hellenistic philosophers, there are Greek philosophers, it goes back to Egypt, it goes back to the Chaldeans, it has connections with the Persians, there are versions of the same philosophy in different civilizations, there is Western philosophy. In other words, philosophy is not done based on an authority or religion, but those who philosophize are those who belong to a religion. That is different. There are certain problems that come with being a member of that religion. It is discussed within philosophy. But the foundation of religion is essential. Muslim philosophers or others do not say, let's establish philosophy on this.
Actually, it is also related to the classification of sciences, because this scientific and Islamic separation that I mentioned is perhaps more common in the modern period, because in the classical period they could examine all sciences under the name of philosophy.
There is also this distinction in the classical period. Sharia sciences and philosophical sciences are separate groups.
There is a different distinction in the modern period.
It's not like in the modern period, but they have a separate group of religious sciences, a separate group of philosophical sciences. Their groups are also different.
How are these separated, sir? How was the separation of Islamic sciences, religious sciences, philosophical sciences different in the classical period from the modern period?
This distinction continues in the modern period, but in the classical period the distinction is as follows. In other words, in order to be a member of the Sharia sciences, 1, you have to be a Muslim. 2, you have to take into account the texts of Sharia, namely the Quran and the Sunnah. 3, according to the tradition you are affiliated with, there is also a problem of how to understand the Quran and the Sunnah. You have to act according to the principles of consensus. In other words, can you say that trading with interest is haram without taking the Quran and the Sunnah into account? You can't. No, that's not possible. In other words, it will have to be covered up like this. It will have to be acted like this. It will have to be established like this. You say all of these based on the Quran and the Sunnah. But the meteorology that philosophers do is not like that. Zoology is not like that. Psychology is not like that. As I said, being a Muslim has an effect, but it is not like that. This is the case in the modern period as well. Sharia sciences still work with the same principles. Philosophical sciences are also different, the way these sciences work. Now, in the modern period, this problem has emerged. In the West, a body of sciences has been built by purifying knowledge from metaphysical implications. Metaphysical implications have ceased to be scientific. In the classical period, metaphysics was a science. Therefore, modern among themselves, they say there is a philosopher, a scholar says he is a disbeliever. The philosopher he disbelieved is normally a monotheistic Muslim. In the modern period, sciences rejected this metaphysical infrastructure. When they say rejected, they put it aside on the grounds that it is not scientific. Of course, not all of them reject it. Let's not say it as a general attitude, but these are no longer scientific. The soul doctrine, which is the door of psychology to metaphysics, is no longer scientific. In other words, criteria such as experimentation, observation, and verifiability or falsifiability are the characteristics of the scientific method. They formed its basis. Now, when this is the case, the set of information that includes metaphysical implications in the modern period also began to move away from being scientifically accessible. It was completely rejected by some traditions. Therefore, are the data transferred from the classical world really scientific or not? How will we accept these religious sciences as science? we started to experience problems regarding this. The emergence of these problems in the modern period creates a difference from the classical world. Otherwise, in the classical world, these were studied separately. In fact, some philosophers did not accept religious sciences as science. In the classical world too. For example, Farabi does not accept the religious sciences as true science. He sees them as a kind of sub-branch of political science. This debate also exists in the classical world. In short, we can say this. When we say Islamic philosophy, sometimes people understand it as the philosophy of the Islamic religion. This is not true. In the civilized world established by the Islamic religion, this is a philosophical activity in which Muslims and non-Muslims participate jointly. Theoretical activity is the activity of teaching scientific knowledge about existing things. First. Second, sometimes when some people say Islamic philosophy, they get the impression that this tradition perceives Islam as philosophy. This is nothing like that. There is no relation between them. This term has settled and is used because it is the most convenient for us. The reason is that we cannot call it Arabic philosophy. In other words, we cannot call it Arabic philosophy because there are works in Turkish and Persian. In one language, yes, the dominant language of this philosophy is Arabic, but it is not taught in one language. Two, we cannot call it Turkish philosophy, Arab philosophy, Parthian philosophy, because it was not addressed according to nationality in the classical world.
Unlike the West, Eastern philosophy is not yet fully established.
So when you say East, you normally think of the Far East, you think of China. No, this is the Mediterranean, this is the continuation of Greek philosophy.
The most explanatory one is Islamic philosophy.
The term that describes a civilization is Islam, and the name of the philosophical activity that emerged in that civilization is Islamic philosophy, meaning the philosophy produced during the Islamic period. There are great philosophers of this: Ibn Sina, Farabi, Ibn Rushd, Faridin Razi. These are important figures of this tradition, and they are also among the most important philosophers of all periods.
Okay, teacher, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, this week Prof. Dr. Ömer Türker talked to us about Islamic philosophy and Islamic philosophers. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.